Welcome to Friend or Foe, the series where I analyze characters from our favorite games and figure out if they would be good to hang out with, or whether you might want to avoid them at the next party. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and in this inaugural episode, we're diving into the Season 1 player protagonist from TellTale Games' The Walking Dead, Lee Everett. The decision to talk about Lee first was made thanks to a vote over on the Community tab on YouTube. I'll be asking you for your input there from time to time, so make sure to keep your eye out for new posts and polls. As always, I've created a playlist for this series, so you can easily keep up with it and watch any new episode available anytime. I'll link that in the description down below. So, just who is Lee Everett? Prior to the start of the zombie outbreak, Lee was a history professor at the University of Georgia in Atlanta. Originally born and raised in Macon, Georgia, Lee was more or less just an average guy living with his wife in the suburbs until one fateful day when sickness would bring him home early from work to find his wife in bed with a state senator. In a fit of rage, Lee attacked the man, ultimately killing him. He would wind up being arrested and eventually convicted of the crime. He was in the back of a police patrol car on his way to begin his prison sentence when the zombie outbreak started. One might say he had someone looking out for him in the beginning, as the officer driving the patrol car was more into talking than driving. A stray zombie crossing the freeway at just the right moment caused a wreck in which the officer, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, is killed and Lee is trapped in the backseat of the vehicle. Escaping the wreck, Lee is able to make his way to a nearby neighborhood and into the safety of what appears to be an empty house. Realizing that something is horribly wrong with the world, he looks around and eventually comes into contact with a little girl named Clementine, whose parents went out of town and haven't returned. A message on the family answering machine tells Lee that the little girl's parents are likely in serious danger and probably not coming back, and he takes it on himself to act as her protector until they are able to figure out for sure what happened to her mom and dad. Choosing to venture out and look for help, Lee and Clementine meet a young man by the name of Sean, who offers them a ride to his father's farm just outside the city. It quickly becomes clear that the world has been turned upside down, and after meeting some of the other refugees at the farm, Kenny, his wife Katja, and their son Duck, Lee is confronted head-on with a new danger when Sean and Duck are attacked by zombies while mending a fence. While Duck escapes the situation with his life, Sean is not so lucky, and his grieving father, Hershel, kicks everyone off his land. With no real options, Lee and Clementine hitch a ride with Kenny and his family, and the group makes their way to Lee's hometown of Macon. And it's in Macon where we start to get a picture of who Lee is at his core. Lee and the group run into some trouble in the form of a horde of zombies in the streets of Macon, before being ushered to safety by a couple members of a small group that's holed up in a pharmacy formerly owned by Lee's parents. His mom and dad appear to have died in the back office of the pharmacy, and his brother is seen as a zombie trapped out in the street. As if all of that wasn't enough, one of the members of this new group, Carly, was a reporter who covered his murder trial. While revealing what she knows about his past, Carly also promises not to tell anyone, and even implies that the ability to murder might come in handy in the new world. But Carly isn't the only one who knows. One of the other members of the group, Larry, makes it clear from the beginning that he doesn't like Lee, and as the group finds a temporary home at an abandoned motel, he voices his displeasure at having Lee in the group at all. For most people, this might be a major problem, but Lee stands his ground and spends the next several months working with Kenny and Larry's daughter Lily on building the motor inn into a decent place to stay. But it isn't all sunshine and rainbows, and the group ends up running dangerously low on food. Hunger leads to rising tempers, and Lee winds up playing the role of mediator between Kenny and Lily more often than not. Some members of the group even suggest to Lee that he would make a good leader given the situation, but he doesn't really want to take the role. And that's almost what would make him the best person to lead the group. Often, people who seek power, like Kenny and Lily, aren't suited to it. Being a leader isn't about solving problems or shouting above other people, it's about giving people something to look up to and a clear path in the darkness. But with the food problem being at the forefront, the leadership role has to take a back seat. Just as all hope seems lost, a beacon appears in the form of a pair of brothers hailing from a farm just up the road a ways. They offer the promise of safety and a good meal, and before long, Lee finds himself at the St. John Dairy, inspecting it and considering whether it would be actually safe for Clementine and the rest of the group. The whole thing seems too good to be true. They have plenty of food, an electric fence that keeps zombies mostly off the property. Except for a broken swing and the need for fuel to keep the generators running, the place could be heaven on earth given the state of the rest of the world. But things aren't what they seem, and after one of the members of the group, Mark, is shot in the shoulder by some bandits, Lee becomes worried the place might not be safe for the group. There's a few other oddities, like the butcher shop in the back of the dairy barn, but the ultimate problem rears its head when Lee discovers that the St. John's turned Mark's injury into an excuse to eat him. Before the night is over, the dairy has fallen, and the group has lost both Larry and Mark. Within weeks, things at the motor inn devolve even more, and Lee is having trouble keeping the group together. Even though he isn't the official leader, he is the thread that's keeping Kenny and Lily from tearing the group apart. To make matters worse, Lily reveals that someone has been stealing from the limited supplies they have, and she asks Lee to look into it. Partnering with Duck, Lee discovers a bag of medicine in one of the vents outside the makeshift wall of the motor inn. Before they can determine who the thief was, however, a group of bandits raid the motel, and the group is forced to flee in the RV that Kenny had been preparing. And things don't get much better out on the road. Within a few hours, the group finds their path forward blocked by a train. Before getting to that point, though, they lose another member of the group, and Kenny and Katja reveal to Lee that Duck was bitten in the escape from the motor inn. Things spiral even more over the next few hours, with Duck and Katja both dying. Katja by her own hand, and Duck being prevented from turning by Lee or Kenny. The whole mess has Lee worried about what to do to keep Clementine from meeting a similar fate, and at the urging of a new friend, Chuck, he begins teaching her to shoot and take care of herself. At this point, Kenny and Lee have decided that the best thing to do is make their way to Savannah, Georgia, and get a boat. But that plan doesn't come without obstacles. For one thing, Lee finds out that someone has been communicating with Clementine over the radio she's been carrying. It's not clear who the stranger is, but he doesn't seem to have any good intentions. There's also the fact that Savannah has been seemingly cleared of all boats, and supplies for that matter. Anyone who had a boat took off when things got bad, and everyone else either died or wound up in a section of town known as Crawford. But hope is reignited when Clementine discovers a boat in the shed behind the house the group was taking shelter in. A trip to Crawford, which apparently fell at some point, provides some needed supplies, and it isn't long before the group is preparing what they'll need to set sail. But it's at the same moment that things start turning south for Lee. Clementine, disappointed in the lack of time to search for her parents, has gone missing. As Lee is searching the house and alleyway for her, he is surprised by a zombie that winds up biting his arm. In just a split second, the course of his life is changed, and he knows he only has a limited amount of time to find the little girl he's come to care for so much. A journey through the city ends in a confrontation with the stranger from the walkie-talkie. There's a brief conversation where Lee is forced to relive the choices he's been making, before Clementine frees herself and takes the man by surprise. Once he's been dealt with, the pair head out into the street, but the Grim Reaper finally makes himself known, and Lee shares a final few moments with Clementine before taking his last breath and riding off into the sunset. So that's Lee's story, but would he be someone that you'd want to hang out with? I tried to keep the player choices out of the conversation as much as possible. While the decision you or I would make as Lee might not change who he is at his core, they could change your perception of him. For instance, you might not think that he's a very good protector to Clementine if he doesn't help Kenny with Larry in the St. John's freezer, or you might think he's too hot-headed if he's always fighting with everyone. That being said, I do want to speculate a little on how I think he would act in some of the bigger decisions the game throws out. The first really big decision is whether to save Duck or Sean on the green farm. I think Lee would likely choose to help Duck first, given how young the boy is, But I also think he was planning to save them both, and he would have if Sean could have held out just a little bit longer. Between Carly and Doug, I think Lee would instinctively go for Carly first. There seems to be a spark between them from the moment they first meet, and I think that would be enough to have him running her way before trying to save Doug. Like the situation with Sean and Duck though, I do think he would have tried to save them both if he had the chance. Moving to maybe one of the most controversial decisions, I actually think that Lee would try to save Larry in the freezer. But I also think that he would want Kenny on standby if that option was there. We'll talk a little bit more about the false dichotomy of choices the game seems to offer at times in a future episode, but this is one of those that I want to call out now because it isn't as black and white as it seems. Larry was likely a goner, and CPR wouldn't be enough to save his life if he was actually having a heart attack. But I think that Lee would have been able to manage checking properly on Larry's actual health while still having Kenny at the ready. When it comes to what to do with Lily, I think Lee would have chosen to leave her on the side of the road. Whether Carly or Doug is the one being shot, Lee seems to be the kind of person that would stick to the lines, refusing to cross them and willing to kick out anyone who did. The last one I want to look at is the situation with Ben. In my philosophy and ethics video, I argued for dropping him in the bell tower, but I don't think that's what Lee would do. I think as a professor who has likely taught many kids just like Ben, Lee would see the potential in the young man and would have hope that he could come back from the brink. I also think that Lee would have been able to connect with Ben given more time, and he might have even been a great mentor for the young man. So is Lee a friend or a foe? Looking at just the things that we know about him, I'd say he would be a friend. While his past could be seen as a bit sketchy, being a convicted murderer before the world fell, he shows remorse for that action, and he seems to be more interested in the well-being of the group as a whole than looking out for just himself. He also shows a willingness to stand by Kenny, despite how Kenny sometimes treats him, and he stands strong in light of Larry's hate toward him. While some might have punched Larry or done far worse, Lee takes the abuse in stride and lets it roll off his back most of the time. In the coming weeks, I'm going to be looking at other characters from the TellTale Games The Walking Dead series in a similar fashion, and ruling on whether I think each would be a good friend or a foe. We'll be covering everyone from Larry to Lily, Kenny, Katja, Duck, Clem, and many more from other seasons as we get to them. As we roll along, I want to hear your thoughts on each character in the comments. Part of the goal with this series is to try to understand these characters from a new perspective. Maybe there's a character that seems awful at first, but softens as you get to know them better. I've also got another series called Philosophy and Ethics in Games, where I pick apart the choices in games like The Walking Dead and figure out what the right thing to do is in some of the most difficult situations presented. Check that series out if you haven't already, and make sure you're subscribed here on YouTube so you don't miss any of the deep dives we take. I've also got channel memberships that give you early access to videos, and a Patreon where I share videos and progress on books I'm writing. So check those out if that sounds interesting to you. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
You're strong, Clem. You can do anything.
But I'm little.
Doesn't mean nothing. You're gonna see bad stuff, but it's okay.
My parents. It's so horrible.
I can't imagine, sweet pea.
And now, you? Please. Please don't be one of them. Please don't become a walker.
There's only one thing you can do. You know that.
I don't know if I can.
You have to shoot me, honey.
Lee, no.
It's okay. It's okay. Clem, I was standing over Duck holding that gun. It was so hard. I'm sorry you're in that position now. I'd give anything for you not to be. But you just have to point it at me. Close your eyes and be thankful you never have to see me as one of them. You can do it. I know you can.
Okay, Lee. I can do it. I can.
Find Omid and Krista. They're outside of town, by the train. You remember how to get back there?
Yes.
Good. They'll take good care of you. And Clem, keep that hair short.
I will. I'll cut it myself.
Great. Good. And also, don't be afraid.